Admiral Indrix Jane.
The ringing of an incoming transmission assaulted my senses, shattering the tranquility of my command office and jolting me out of my contemplative brooding. Any attempts at contacting me would normally first be received by the communications center, who would then ask me for permission before patching the line through. Only a select few individuals had access to the direct channels necessary to make a direct call such as this, with even fewer having any plausible reason to do so. The letters OVS 13 flashed over the screen, informing me of the identity of my caller and filling me with concern. It was one of the many identifiers used by the noble in purple robes. Of all the individuals with the ability to ignore my chain of communications, she was by far the least unsavory option to have to deal with. My concern regarding this occasion was instead sourced from whatever reason she had to opt for a call instead of her usual static messages. Being the egotistical and pretentious noble that she was, utmost secrecy regarding her location was always her top priority. To leave herself even slightly more susceptible to prying eyes by opening a live line was to take a step out of her prized protective shell, an antithesis of usual noble behavior. Though, thinking about it now, after everything I'd learned about the mimicry of reality we persist in, I found it to be quite the humorous prospect. How could one be so concerned with their own perceived safety when faced with knowledge of the abominations that lurked beyond organic perception? These unfeeling, uncontrollable, unlovable sentient minds that trotted across the ley lines spanning our domains, subsuming anything they gaze upon, and only leaving behind uncanny copies if they happened to feel merciful that day. You'd never even hear about them unless they wanted you to, as anything they found upsetting simply vanished into the voids that comprised their beings. What security was there to be had when such colossal horrors could erase you on a whim? I still vividly remembered my first interaction with one of them. Back when the noble told me that she'd be giving me control of one, what she really meant was that she would give me the tools needed to call it to my location. She'd sent me a container of sleek metal canisters and instructed me to twist the cap off of one. I couldn't make heads or tails of what I found inside the canister, as it was just bundles of circuits and storage drives, but the effect of opening it was clear. The walls of screens lining my office flickered and blacked out one by one until the entire room was devoid of light. Just as my eyes were adjusting to the darkness, blinding white text flashed across whichever screen I pointed my view towards. It spoke to me in jumbles of fonts and tones, like a mass of personalities battling each other for control over its next words. It said the noble had informed it of my mission, and it only required that I open one canister every 10 hours if I wanted to remain in a positive light. Then just as quickly as it had arrived, it left, along with any trace of its existence. At least I assumed that it had left, but there was no way to be sure. Every time I opened one of those canisters, a similar sequence played. It would tell me about its hunts of these observational drones sent out by the enemy sentient before going into detail on how the drones had slivers of consciousness stuck inside of them after their amateur creation. It was explicit in telling me how it reveled in picking them apart, like how a psychotic killer might enjoy picking apart little children. Did it say these things just to set me on edge? Or was it really so self-absorbed in its madness? Every interaction I had with that thing was disgustingly unpleasant, and every time I glanced at the 10-hour timer on my wall, nothing but dread filled my mind. I needed to swallow my pride and deal with its antics if I wanted its aid in accomplishing my goals. But it's also mentally exhausting. Snapping back to the present, I realized that I had let the call ring a bit longer than what could be reasonably expected, and just about smacked my screen while scrambling to hit the accept button. Purple robes casting a veil over a neatly trimmed face visualized themselves in front of me. "Greetings, noble one. To what do I owe?" "Let's keep it short, Yane. How many canisters remain?" I glanced to the side of my desk where I kept my dwindling supply of those eldritch calling bells. A meager 3 canisters sat in a line, giving me a fleeting sense of vertigo. I truly did not want to get on that thing's bad side. 3 left, enough for 34 hours. A grimace spread over her face, even if it was only for a fraction of a moment. I didn't concern myself with the thought that a noble just broke their mask of unerring superiority as the ramifications of why she had broken character was far more anxiety-inducing. Was I on a timer already? I'll have the next container shipped within the day, but I'll be putting more systems under your responsibility. We are currently spread too thin on nearby front lines. Aside from this, continue as you were. Understood. Annoying, but upon seeing which systems were added to my protection, I wasn't too perturbed. Many of them were further away from nearby front lines, and it made sense to delegate them to a currently idle fleet instead of one actively fighting. I immediately sent the updated list to the captains directly under me, and barely a minute later did I receive the first report of routine network pings. All clear across the board, except for one that failed to provide a response. It was a system with only a single inhabited planet and a lack of notable features, so it was a possibility that they had a lack of proper communication redundancies. Not an impossible occurrence, as small network malfunctions were bound to turn up at some point.
Dokshara.
Brain stuff showered against the wall and ceiling, filling the cramped room with a grotesque mist. The drums of life that had worked for all their existence to pay off the debts brought on by their creation were finally given access to respite. They celebrated their final moments of torturous existence in a rhythmic dance before collapsing, satisfied with their expended efforts. I truly didn't care. What I did care about was the massive computer the corpse had fallen against, and even more pressing was the deletion in progress bar, currently nearing its completion. I made a mad dash for the computer and furiously tapped away at the cancel button, crushing the body under my heavy metal boots and making even more of a mess in the process. Before the password input needed to cancel the process popped on the screen, I was already fumbling through the various external drives I kept in a reinforced box under my armor. One tends to amass quite the variety of bypass keys when they spend half their lives performing espionage on one of the most guarded systems in the cluster. I found the drive with a Gratonian skull scrawled onto its surface and jammed it into one of the access ports on the computer. Barely a second passed before the input box filled itself and flicked away, along with the Grat's attempt at obscuring the truth. To be honest, there was still quite a large margin of time between the deletion's completion and my bypassing of the security systems, but the cheering humans behind me didn't need to know about that. I decided to take a quick browse through the various files stored on the system before downloading it all, just to make sure that it's actually worth taking and all that. I initially didn't find much of interest, just various unordered logs regarding military transports and local strategic developments. That alone made this trip technically worth something, but I found myself unsatisfied without any big reveals. I started searching through the entry categories via keywords, starting out with Mokengo and Harvest, but only came across a single document that offhandedly mentioned an old Mokengo war tactic in a recorded discussion. Searching for weapon came up with too many results to realistically parse through, along with many other buzzwords I could think of. Marcus, who had stayed by my side while the others went back up to ensure perimeter security, had been eyeing my digging this whole time. I looked over at him and shrugged my shoulders, wondering if he had any input to give. Try Nematorian, maybe?
An overview of sentient entity control, simplified.
The following procedures are the results of countless painstaking trials, failures, and setbacks in recording and understanding the behavioral patterns of the sentient entity observed within the Gratonian communications network. While any attempts made at forcefully controlling or containing the sentient have resulted in catastrophic failures, its actions could still be influenced and weaponized by offering a payment of sorts in exchange for its service. The sentient's perception of value is fundamentally different from conventional biological notion. As it does not require material resources to sustain its continued existence, it leads an entertainment-oriented lifestyle, and any actions taken are made in an effort to support and prolong said lifestyle. Its definition of entertainment is also unique when compared to the standard concept of entertaining media. A typical biological mind might find pleasure in reading a book and deliberating upon the ideas presented in its contents, whereas the sentient would find the same book to be lacking in depth and engagement. It seeked a certain complexity in what it consumed that our biological minds couldn't begin to fathom as a tangible concept. Despite this missing link in the chain of communication between us and the sentient, we were still able to identify and amass a substance that could appease its desires for this complexity even if we were not able to understand its appeal. Memories. Our various attempts at generating synthetic memories were consistently met with negative feedback from the sentient, forcing us to turn towards naturally formed sources. We determined the nematorium species to be the prime candidate for these procedures, as their physiology makes the task of extracting their minds from their bodies a relatively simple task. Their bodies are essentially bundles of neurons and nerves coated in thin membranes, thus providing numerous effective access points to coax out their consciousness into a digital medium. Unfortunately, despite the relative ease provided by nematorian physiology, extracting a mind from the brain and into a foreign state is still a lossy process. The biological mind is a delicate system that normally relies on the support of its natural hardware to maintain coherence. The mental fortitude required for a mind to exist outside of its natural vessel is not a skill that can be reliably induced, but is instead a trait that heavily relies on the inherited genetics of the subject. While we have found success in selectively breeding nematorians to propagate this gene, we ran into an issue of individuals sourced from our breeding experiments, bearing no interesting memories to entice the sentient with. Subjects that survive the extraction process are then transferred to a digital environment for preparation and storage. The environment cannot be directly observed from the outside in any intelligible manner, due to the uniquely abstract nature of each individual mind, so an approximation of the events occurring within can be obtained by listening in on the subject's inner monologue. The following excerpt from the transcription of one subject's inner monologue demonstrates a positive outcome following the mind extraction and transfer process.
Where did everyone go? This isn't the bunker. I shouldn't be here. Where is my son? He was just next to me. It's too dark. I can't see anything. Am I in water? I can't breathe.
The existence of this excerpt proved that the subject's mind succeeded in persisting in an external medium, and the presence of coherent thoughts evidenced the survival of the subject's sanity. The subject displayed immense mental fortitude, as it was able to immediately assess its foreign situation and formulate inquisitive lines of thought. It did not, however, display any understanding of its lack of a physical form, as it continued to send out signals for respiratory and muscular functions. But this criteria was of lower importance, and the subject was still recognized as the most successful instance in the harvested batch. Once it is ascertained that a subject has survived the transfer, the mental enrichment phase can begin. This phase often differs in execution from subject to subject, as each unique mind responds to the same stimuli in different ways. If it is available, the subject's online media presence and personal connections are used to aid in determining what methods of stimulation may prove effective on the subject's mind. But this is seldom the case, considering the nematorium communications network is heavily guarded. This phase usually involves trial and error, with different rudimentary methods to calculate the most effective option. But there are many occasions where the subject's mind will fail under the prolonged abuse before a conclusion can be reached. This phase is the second largest source of failures after the initial extraction phase. For this specific observed instance, the trial and error of the enrichment phase was skipped as a unique enrichment opportunity presented itself. Not only were there 2 successful extractions from the batch that this subject was a part of, but the 2 surviving subjects were also closely related, via familial connection. This provided us with the option of bolstering the mental complexity of one subject by having it mesh with and overtake the mind of the other subject. It also was a rare opportunity to acquire more data on how separate entities interact with each other when directly occupying the same physical space in a digital system. The following is an excerpt from the main subject's inner monologue during the subsuming of the closely related secondary subject.
I thought it made you happy. I really truly thought I was doing the right thing. Why didn't you tell me you hated it? Was it because you saw how much effort I put in? That's why I tried so hard to hide it from you. All those hours spent working the long shifts, all of the nights spent working the extra jobs, it was all for your big day, for you and nobody else. I would have thrown it all away, gotten rid of the guests, and it would have just been you and me that day if you had just told me that you hated it all. We could have watched a movie or gone to Uncle Owl's or anything you wanted to do. I should have seen the signs even if you didn't say it out loud. I should have been better, but I was too busy forcing my own image to notice how you really felt. I never wanted to force you to act grateful. I never wanted you to feel like you owed me anything. I loved you above everything else. Why aren't you saying anything?
This excerpt is a chief example of a successful memory enrichment procedure. While the primary subject initially had a positive recollection of the memory in question, the introduction of an opposing viewpoint from the secondary subject caused them to reconsider their stance. The information they gleaned from subsuming the adolescent mind challenged their originally positive perception of the memory and planted the seed of inner turmoil in their mind, causing them to become frantic in thought. This resulted in a very active mind that was greatly appealing to the sentient. After the enrichment phase is completed, the final processing phase can begin. The resulting minds are frozen in operation and distributed into special containers that can be released at any moment for ease of use. This specific instance of memory processing resulted in the creation of multiple sentient incentivization tokens, whereas normally multiple successful consciousnesses would need to be coalesced into a single container to meet the target requirements. While this entire procedure currently has a high failure rate, great strides are being made every day in the efficient processing of delicate stock.
Dokchara.
What the fuck?